Hello and welcome to Life Beyond the Numbers, the podcast where we share stories, insights and strategies that go beyond some of the numbers we encounter in our work life. I'm Susan Triadon. I work with organisations who put people first. I've lived and worked in many countries. I've met people who love what they do and people who don't. People who bring their full selves to work and people who won't. And together with my guests, we place a lens on and focus in on the people side of work life. Because we know that it is people who do the work, not numbers. And if we are treated well, we will perform well and might even generate better numbers. Today, I am delighted to be joined by Philip Pozzo di Borgo-Oliver. Philip, you are most welcome to Life Beyond the Numbers.
Well, thank you, Susan. I'm delighted to be contributing in some small way to a great conversation that we started some weeks ago now, and very fortuitous met. In fact, we were talking about, I think, innovation for finance professionals, and there was some sort of oblique connection, but I'm delighted. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's very kind.
Yeah, no, it's great. I love that. I love LinkedIn, how I think you commented on a post, then we had a conversation, and now here we are doing a recorded one. And you just never know who you're going to meet, which is a wonderful part of life.
Indeed, yes, exactly. And these conversations, as we were saying earlier on, are kind of meant to be, in a sense, overheard, aren't they? And grab people's attention, no matter what sort of angle or kind of item it catches their interest. We don't know.
Exactly, and that sounds like we're putting a bit of a pressure on ourselves now.
No pressure.
But back to LinkedIn, because on your LinkedIn profile, Philip, you describe your work life as having two themes, and this really struck me. So tell me what those are, tell the listeners what those themes are and how they became your themes.
Well, so it's an interesting question, and you asked some great questions, if I may say, but I think that what I found useful coming back to LinkedIn was, I guess we have to curate ourselves these days, don't we? I mean, we kind of decide what we say, what we don't say, which is both a good and a bad thing. But it does give us a pause to, I guess, to think a little bit about what we really want to tell the world about what we do, what we stand for, and so on. But LinkedIn is interesting. And so my profile, when I was writing this, and I've rewritten this so many times, as I'm sure we all have, it was kind of looking for themes, just trying to tell my story. And I told it in one way and then another way. And then I began to realize that actually adventure and innovation are the two areas that I guess keep coming up in my life in different ways. And let me say that adventure, let me begin there, is not adventure with a capital A, and it's not backpacking in Tibet, as much as I would love to do that. But it's kind of accidental, really. I was born in Singapore, and the first 4 years of my life were spent there because my father was in the Royal Navy at the time, and he was posted there with my mum. We were there for 4 years, so my first formative years, of which I don't remember very much, but I'm sure my life is sort of coloured by that. And then a kind of a meander, if I can describe this briefly, from Singapore back to the UK, where my father was reposted, and then left the Royal Navy at the time at my mother's request. He set up a business, and my mother soon had enough of that and the life that required her to actually get involved in running that. And so soon they were looking for an opportunity in another navy in South Africa. So in about 1975, we ended up going to South Africa, to Cape Town, Simonstown in particular, where my father was starting a new chapter of his life, really. And that kind of took us to a whole new world and a whole new culture, which I spent another 35 years in, which was amazing. What I haven't said is my mother is French and my father is English. So already there was a strange sort of dynamic going on, and growing up in South Africa was in the middle of apartheid and through the dismantling of apartheid ultimately into 1994. But the memory living in a world where toilets were segregated on the station, you'd have toilets for African people, for white people. And this was normal as you might expect it to be. So for me, already my adventures were interesting. I started university in Cape Town. I had an amazing time there, and ended up joining De Beers Marine, which was a very pioneering part of the De Beers diamond. And I guess that took me through various twists and turns. But ultimately, I started my life as an engineer, but was involved in high precision underwater navigation. So lots of maths, lots of technical stuff, some exciting pioneering times, really, because we were exploring the entire coast of West Africa and looking for diamonds that had been washed down by the Orange River. The Orange River was sampling those diamonds from the interior, from the Kimberley area. So these big pipes, if you like, diamond pipes, which you might know about. And it was washing those diamonds down into the sea. And the sea was reworking them on the ancient coastline. And so you would end up with these deposits. And our mission was really to go and find them, identify them, locate them, mine them profitably. And it was all sort of the time that I joined De Beers Marine was just out of university. In fact, not even quite out of university, because I left after my father died, just before I turned 21, and went into this working environment that was just fascinating. You had Dutchmen, you had Englishmen, you had South Africans, you had people from everywhere and from all disciplines applying their minds to extracting diamonds from sediment, anything up to sort of 5 meters deep, under 100 meters of water. And so we were trying all kinds of things, and we borrowed technologies from different countries and different industries, oil and gas, for example. And so it was a fun time. It was a really wonderful time. And I was really privileged to work with some people who I retrospectively realized were just wonderful leaders and super inspiring in their own way, and gave us freedom, all of us, to explore careers, to explore things of interest. And it was a very rich and deeply meaningful time in my life.
Amazing. I have never heard of most of what you've just said before.
It's a bit niche.
The mining of the sea for diamonds. That's quite. Does it still go on?
Yes, it does. Yeah, and certainly at the time, and I'm going back now, sort of 20 years really, but that was really, as I said, very pioneering. But in fact, we realised that these were all kind of gem quality stones that we were mining at the time, and a good size, it's almost 3/4 of a carat. It's just a wonderful, I think what captures the time was, I remember a couple of years forward where we were already systematizing and making this more of a repeatable process, this mining and extraction business. A very large drill ship that was brought across from oil and gas from the North Sea, converted into a drilling ship. So this drilling ship would literally have, if you imagine, long bits, like a long drill bit with a flat plate at the end and a sort of suction device, and you would literally be sucking sediment up, and you would be processing all of this on board. And I remember one day being invited down, because I was the surveyor. This was my métier, as it were. So I was in charge of production reporting, but also the high precision underwater navigation side of things, figuring out where we were and where we'd been mining. And so I was invited one day to go down to the hand sorting, the final stage of this process. And it was quite literally, it was just diamonds in the dark. It was the most surreal thing. If you can imagine, picture some sort of Quentin Tarantino film when they're in a massive warehouse or a big hangar and it's all dark, and you've got a wooden table that just is this rickety thing, sort of 4 feet by 2 feet. And there are 6 of us crowded around this table, some burly security folks and the captain and myself. And we're doing a hand sort of these diamonds. And it was just the most extraordinary thing. For a young man, I was probably about 23 or 24 at the time. And just looking at this tray of diamonds that looked really like broken glass, a braided glass in a sense. They didn't look anything like the things we of course see on cut jewelry. But it was just wonderful. And I guess it captures just how strange it was that we were all kind of just hanging around this table talking about these diamonds that must have represented millions of dollars worth of product. But it was a strange old time. And I think it really ignited the second part of my passion. So the theme of innovation. And constantly in myself, I recognized quite early the desire to always think, how can we do this differently? How can we do this better? How can we make this simpler? And Yeah, so looking back in that curated LinkedIn way, probably the beginning of my deep interest in business improvement and in innovation.
Amazing, isn't it? Before we started recording, we were talking about how people's backstories inform who they are today and how they show up in the world. And I would never have known any of this and how you got into what you do. And it brings things to life in ways that you see people differently, because you get like, wow, between the travel, the adventure, but also playing with the earth's resources in such a different way, and like you said, figuring out how to do that and how to do it better and how to make it, systematize it and all of that, because innovation has become one of those buzzwords that we tend to kind of go, oh God, here we go again, we've got to innovate. So what is it really? What is innovation, or what does it mean to innovate?
So that's a wonderful question. If I continue through
Please
the adventure theme and knit it up with the innovation piece,
because you're not distracting me from the real answer.
No, I won't. I promise I'll return to this. But it's a wonderful question, and it's a question that trips us up, because I dare say, whilst it's important, and I'm going to almost contradict myself, I think it's vitally important to have an answer to that question, and equally, it's not important to have an answer to that question, and I'll explain why I say that.
I hope so.
So fast forward through a career at De Beers, which took eventually to the Johannesburg head office, where I set up a business improvement team, and that business improvement team was based on things that I'd learned and heard of in the oil and gas industry around performance improvement. These were techniques, these were methods of performance coaching that were kind of what I used to call industrial performance coaching. So it's kind of on the ground, hands-on, very much in the workplace, and trying to help people deliver their best every day. And so that took me to an opportunity in Scotland, where I'm speaking to you from in Edinburgh now, and a career in oil and gas, as it happened. There, I started off with this performance improvement focus, and accidentally, I came across someone who now, with her husband, make up together, the three of us make up Eureka Europe, our innovation training business based in the UK. But the definition I came to, having spent part of my oil and gas career in the business improvement space and latterly in innovation as the innovation manager for a large energy services company in the EMEA region, Europe, Middle East, and Africa, this question was fundamental, because I had the opportunity to run this team, to basically pick up the baton, if you like, from a predecessor and assume this pretty important role in the organization. But I wasn't ever trained for innovation. I didn't know what innovation meant. And I did what every reasonable person would do, and certainly every engineer would probably do, is go look for the books. I've got a number of them on my shelf here. And I would read and ask questions and see what the latest thinking is. And it was singularly unsatisfying, because I think that this can be overthought. And there is no lack of literature on the subject of what innovation is, or what indeed it should be. And most of it comes from business school, and most of it is worthy of contemplation, but actually not particularly helpful.
That's so diplomatic.
Well, so I think the important point is that these are all maybe useful to a degree, but they are not actually practical. And so the Damascus moment I had, Susan, when the penny really dropped for me, my aha moment for innovation and understanding what it meant, was actually after I no longer was in that role, and I was actually running my own business as a consultant and business improvement consultant. And I heard my now partner, Helen Potter, speaking at the Institute of Directors, and she had a lunch and learn session that I went to, and thought, well, it sounds interesting. I'm always intrigued by innovation. I'm going to go find out what this is all about. And so we come to this moment, Susan, where we define innovation. And it was a slide she put up, and it was effectively a little formula that was comprised of 3 parts. And it said, innovation or effective innovation is effectively made up of three things. But before we get to those three things, the definition is that innovation needs to be meaningfully unique.
Ooh.
That's it. Meaningfully unique. Now, that in itself may not blow your hair back, but meaningfully unique, when you think about this a wee bit, is meaningful to whom? To somebody. And it's meaningful, we think, in our world, to three parts. It's the person or people, the team that's involved in the innovation project or the idea.
Mm-hmm.
It's got to be meaningful to the organization. That is to say, it's got to play a part in advancing the strategy or the business objectives. And if it doesn't, then whatever you're doing, let's face it, is just either pure R&D research, which has its place, or is actually counterproductive and is a waste of your organization's money. And of course, the third and final party to whom this has to be meaningful is the customer, the marketplace, right? And that's true whether it's business to business, because you never sell to a company, you're always selling to a person in the organization. You know, so someone has to buy, someone has to believe, someone has to understand what it is you're putting across. So meaningful, super, super key, but also unique, because unique for us means new and different. And new and different, again, like all these things, exists on a spectrum. And the definition is elegant, it's beautiful in its own way, because it doesn't mean that if you're doing business improvement in your own organization and your own processes, it doesn't have a place. It doesn't mean that the definition is no longer valid. Not at all. It just means that the scope of what's meaningful, the scope of what's new and different, is something else. And so for me, looking back at what I was trying to do in my organization at the time in oil and gas as an innovation manager, would have been so much clearer had I had that definition as a starting point. And of course, it needs much more else to go with it. But that was the beginning for me.
I mean, there's so many things going around in my head, and I'm thinking about things that have come to the market, you know, that are meaningful, unique to me as a user, or where I've worked and things have been new and different. But it also feels like there's a difference between improving a process or innovating. And a lot of places, I guess, are business improvement think that they're innovating.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? There's a difference between improvement and innovating.
Yeah. Yes, there is. And again, if we simply say that it's, first of all, it doesn't matter. And again, this is part of where we get tripped up in this whole thing of innovation, etc. Does it fall into box A or box B? Well, if we say it's on a spectrum and there are degrees of it, then we can kind of sidestep that conversation. What's really important is to say, what is it that you're trying to do? What is the mission for these ideas that you wish to have? Is the mission, we want to make our existing invoicing process more efficient? Superb, that's quite clear. But on the other hand, is it cutting edge stuff? Is it sort of on the horizon? Is it working with absolutely, you know, emerging technologies? Is it working with artificial intelligence, for example? And that's also absolutely fine. The originator of this definition is a man called Doug Hall, who, after 35 years, 40 years of initially working at Procter & Gamble and having a stellar career as a master inventor, went on to become a TV and celebrity innovation guru. He's based in Cincinnati in the US, and had a career in that role, in that mold, as the go-to guru, and feted in all kinds of magazines, etc., Financial Times and various other places. There's a long list of achievements behind that. But the conclusion he came to after a good number of years of making a lot of money and making a lot of clients very happy was actually it's not enough to be the guy who's going to help organizations to innovate. What he wanted to do was to actually codify all of this so that anybody can innovate. And whether it's on the high-tech end of the spectrum, or whether it's on the business improvement end, it doesn't matter. He realized that what he understood and what he knew, and that his practice, Procter & Gamble initially, and subsequently with the likes of Nike and Kimberly-Clark and Disney and so on, was that this could be taught, this could be scaled. This was something anybody can learn, any organization can pick up. And so he codified it. Literally, he pulled this together as a fully documented approach to innovating in the way I've described, all the way from having those ideas, for getting those ideas, big and bold ones, to communicating those ideas, shaping them, making them accessible to members of your team so they understand what they're signing up for, making them clear to your investors because they're going to spend money with you, and ultimately taking them to a commercial reality, to bringing them into the real world. And wrapped all around that was this question of how you lead innovation and the role of the leader in that, in creating a culture that supports it. Because we can all be a kind of one-hit wonder and come up with a good idea once, and maybe, if we're lucky, take that to market, and if we're lucky, make that successful. But how do you do that year after year? How do you do that several times a year? And moreover, how do you get your team to do that when you are no longer just a 2 or 3 or 4 person organization and you scale up? So these are questions that Doug Hall has answered.
Yeah, and if you're not moving forward, there's no such thing as standing still, really. You're going backwards. So to move forward, you need to be thinking, what's coming next? What am I changing? What am I creating? How am I innovating? And for all of that, like you say, it's the leadership, isn't it? And it's the leadership of probably empowerment. It's that culture of autonomy for ideas to come from anywhere.
Yeah, exactly, Susan. And I always like to say that every organization, indeed every family, has a culture. Whether you know it or not, whether you like the culture you have or not, it's there. And how much better might it be if we could be intentional about the culture that we wish to create? When I was reflecting on my LinkedIn profile and thinking about the stories I wanted to tell, part of that reflection, if you will, was helped along by a mate of mine, Chris Patton, who was the leader behind and the inspiration behind a book that he pulled 19 others together, including myself and himself. So a 20 author book together called Purposeful People. And what he was asking us to tell was our own stories about ourselves, a little like we're discussing today. And it got me thinking about my culture, what inspired me to look for adventure and to be interested in innovation. And I mentioned career-wise, De Beers Marine and De Beers being an amazing place for fostering all of that. But going back further, I realized that actually my dad, who was in the Royal Navy and took us to Singapore and a number of places, including Cape Town, was in many ways that guy, that person who made it happen for me, because he allowed me to try different things, whether it was scouting, whether it was judo, trying different clubs and not always succeeding, but he derided anything I tried. And I remember one day, gosh, I must have been about 9. There was this bookcase in this playroom where all my stuff was. And I remember saying, Dad, can you help me? Can you help me? I take this bookcase, this big heavy wooden bookcase, and I'm going to turn it upside down vertically. And I said, well, Phil, what are you going to do now? So I said, well, look, I'm going to get all my books and I'm going to label them. And I'm going to stack all the shelves, and I'm going to rent these books out to my mates. So I kind of created a little mini library. So there I was trying to rent these books out to my mates at 5 South African cents per book or per week or something. Anyway, complete financial business disaster, but nonetheless, and had great fun. And it was those kinds of things. And I had a little detective agency. I was reading obviously too much Alfred Hitchcock, Three Investigators. I spent so much of my childhood pocket money on maps and books and systems and all kinds of strange, wonderful things, but had so much fun with my mates doing that I realized he was a man who was quite a hard taskmaster to his sailors and to his men and women in the Navy. And yet, he allowed me a lot of latitude. He allowed me to play. He allowed me to think. He allowed me to try and fail. And without being critical as well. And so he made it a safe place for thoughtful experimentation, if I can put a sort of a slightly technical phrase on it. And that meant that it was okay. So I have grown up and I still to this day, as you can probably hear my voice, get excited about stuff that even might be tangential to what I'm really looking to do. But because well, and my eyes have just settled on the quote, which I keep to the side of my computer here from T.S. Eliot, from Little Gidding. And the quote is, "We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time." And when I first came across that some years back, I thought, yeah, that works. That resonates for me. I get that, because we don't know what we don't know. So when we start with something, and that's perhaps the coming back to the full arc of innovation that's practical, it's that the stuff we teach in what we call innovation engineering, which is this method that Doug Hall articulated and documented, it's practical, because he'd be the first person to say, you don't know what you don't know, so get started and learn something. Learn something. So we only learn something when we say, I have a hypothesis, I've got an idea, I'm going to do this. And I think that if I do this, then I'm going to see these results. So I go and try, and whatever the results are, I have to then reflect on them, and I have to study them, and I have to decide, well, was I right? Was I wrong? What else did I learn? And so we reshape what we thought, and we come back to the starting point. We come back to the beginning of our exploration, and we see things again as if for the first time. And that is it. It's not that difficult. It's not rocket science, but it is science in its own way.
It's not rocket science. I get that it's science, but a lot of what you're saying there is about the atmosphere, or back to that word culture you use, because I've been in organizations where leaders are not interested in ideas that have to be figured out. So they almost want that end result guaranteed, otherwise it's a waste of time. So what that does is, I think it brings about more of an atmosphere of fear, or an atmosphere of saying yes to the leader's idea, which is probably, there is nothing, what was the word? Nothing meaningfully unique about in the first instance. That's what maybe gives it a bad name, or a buzzword feel to it, because what you're talking about, creativity is the lifeblood of our economies, our organizations, and for that to happen, you have to be in a safe place.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. And so we talk, and again, leadership is not unlike innovation, in the sense that, what does it mean? What is leadership, right? And it can be so overcomplicated. And on a different point, a shout out to Steve Ratcliffe, who I have a high regard for as a leaders and a teacher or a coach to leaders. And his simple formulation of leadership as create a future that people can believe in, engage, get them to buy into that, and have the conversations that support and reinforce that, and deliver, focus on the things and enable a culture of delivery. And that little future engaged delivery model is a fantastic leadership conversation in its own right, which I would encourage people to go and find out more about. But to your point, a culture of innovation, it's almost, if we again, let's unpack that. Let's take away the sort of the opaqueness behind what that really means, and make this really practical. I have had the privilege of working with some wonderful leaders over the years, and they've all been enablers. They've all been humble in their own way. They might have been extremely, successful, and perhaps indeed on some occasions very bold, and indeed perhaps outspoken, and maybe proud in their own respects. But when it mattered, they would probably say these three. I don't know the answer to the question and to the innovation challenge that we face, right? And as a result, I need help. I need your help. I need the team's help. I need other people to step up here and help. And let me just really make this clear. I fail a lot. In other words, when I try stuff, I don't always get it right, and I don't always get it right first time. So if a leader can have the humility and the intentionality to voice that, to evidence that in the workplace, in their organization, around their team, then I think a wonderful thing happens, because Doug Hall studied over 2 years with something like 6,000 different teams what it takes to have big and bold ideas. And he discovered that there are three factors. The three things you need are, first of all, what he calls stimulus, which is, if you like, the spark, the creative spark for an idea. And that itself can come from any number of sources. It can come from your customers, it can come from your people, it'll come from totally unrelated stuff. But you need that as a starting point, and no one, I think, would disagree with that. But what really throws the fuel on that spark, or really provides the if you like, the environment for that spark to turn into a flame and actually ignite things, is diversity. And I really would, emphasize, this is diversity of experience, this is diversity of gender, of course. It's neurodiversity, which is something that we probably, and I'm certainly just beginning to learn more about in the context of my own family and someone who's quite neurodiverse that's close to me. And so what joy can we get from collaborating with others and getting stimulus from them? So it's an exponential. So stimulus with diversity is an exponential equation. But the bad guy, the thing that diminishes all of that effort and reduces your culture of innovation, is fear. And it's fear of experimentation, right? It's a fear of, if I try this, I remember what happened the last time I spoke up, or I had an idea. I got the funny look from the boss, or I got the rolling eyes from my colleagues, or maybe they didn't actually dismiss it out of hand, and maybe we tried something. But what happened actually in the organization when we didn't achieve our goals? Oh, the project got shut down. What does that mean? And so fear is the thing we can intentionally dial down, and we can give permission to try, and we can have a response as a leader that's encouraging and that's actually affirming, and that says, well, the most important thing I need from you, Phil, right now is I need you to tell me what you learned from that. So whatever happened, what did you learn? And the next question I'm going to ask you, Phil, is what are you going to do next? Right? What's the next cycle of learning? And a wonderful thing, again, to this whole thing of innovation being so overthought, is that actually we just need to go and run experiments that are designed to learn something and to do rapid cycles in hours or days, perhaps weeks, rather than months and quarters, which is the traditional approach in corporate life, certainly, to running innovation projects. And we know from a considerable database of research projects and innovation projects in the Innovation Engineering Institute that projects that go through a typical corporate process end up losing, on average, about 50% of their value. So that's down to the culture, that's down to playing it safe, that's down to not having an understanding of how you de-risk innovation and de-risk an innovation project, because it's going to be, what is it going to be? It's going to be meaningfully unique, which means that there's going to be new and different, and new and different means people are going to be going, that sounds crazy, that sounds mad, we can't do that. Well, how are we going to possibly achieve that? So again, how we attend to this question of fear, how we encourage it, how we make space for it, how we encourage learning, how we fuel collaboration. These are the jobs of a leader, and a leader that has humility. And as I say in the chapter I wrote for Purposeful People, is this is in the deep tissue of leading. It's the fabric of leadership. It's what makes a leader really a leader, in my view, at least in the context of innovation.
There's a lot of food for thought in there. And you say in the field of innovation, but what you talk about, the humility, the I don't know, I need help, I fail lots, but you can apply that pretty much to any part of the organization. So actually it's the traits that you're looking for that lend themselves to holding space for whether it's an issue in HR or with people and performance, or whether it's innovation or fraud, or I don't know, whatever it might be. It's having that curious approach that, I suppose, it's the growth mindset, isn't it? It's growing your people with your business that lends itself to this.
Yes, wonderfully put, Susan. That's exactly it. It's exactly that. And realizing that there's the cliche of people are the most important asset in the business. And well, it's not, is it? It's people are the business, and that's it. And it doesn't matter if it's AI or anything else that is running the back end, but someone had to design it. Someone had to set it up.
Well, that's so simple. Like, people are the business. That might be my new catchphrase, Philip. No, but when you think about it, yeah, the machines do so much, but only from the instructions of people. And to get AI to do what we want to do, we have to be able to innovate. AI isn't going to tell us how to best organize it or to make it meaningful. What was the word? Meaningfully unique, so
Yeah, and there's some wonderful Reith lectures, by the way, going on at the moment just on this topic of AI. I don't know if you
no, I haven't.
Yeah, the wonderful Reith lecturers. I think, gosh, I forget who it is, but doing an amazing job on that. So I would check that out as well. But you're so right, Susan. And right now in COVID times, when we listen to the debate, as I'm sure you have, about remote working and whether this is a flash in the pan, whether there's a phase, whether we'll go back to whatever normal is supposed to mean. I've had some big dinner party conversations with friends of ours. On the one hand, our friend said to us the other night, well, people need to go back in the office. People need to go back into the office because it's too hard and leaders just need to have their people in there and so on. And I said, well, I totally disagree. I don't disagree that there are jobs that require being in the office. This is another conversation. But the point I want to make is what's happened is that the job of the leader is now in sharp focus, because you cannot run a distributed organization that works without being a more intentional leader, in my view. You have to be more thoughtful because most of the cues are missing. The daily, the cliche again, the water cooler talks, etc. But being able to walk into an office, spot someone that doesn't look quite comfortable or happy about something and going over to them and having a conversation. Doing all those things, understanding what makes people tick, coming right back to the start of our conversation, Susan, your podcast, helping people understand or peek into other people's work-life existence, their backstories. We have to know these things. We have to be sensitive to this. We have to know what's going on behind the closed door of their rooms or their offices, etc. And so the leader's work is harder, perhaps, but it is more. What it does is it demands more from them. And I think that's a wonderful opportunity, actually. Whatever the long-term change in our society is, I think that it's a great opportunity for people to step up and actually be more thoughtful about the culture that they want to create.
And you're right, there's a spotlight on that role of leadership in a way that isn't any longer just about profit. And for many, many, many eons now, it's been profit first. And of course, you need to make a profit, but it's your people that are making the profit for you. And if they're happy, then they will make more profit.
Yeah.
And you can't just keep an eye on the numbers because the numbers don't make the decisions. They don't do the work. The people do. Yeah, there's life beyond those numbers.
Indeed.
And yeah, that's really changing, actually. I think that spotlight is moving from, well, how are you intentionally designing workplaces or hybrid working or whatever it might be to help people give their best?
Totally. And it really comes back to how you design a workplace and also how you design work, right? So now you have to set the mission. You have to say, I'm not even going to see you for most of today, or indeed most of this week, Phil. So here's the deal, right? We're going to stack hands on this mission. So this week, we need to achieve these outcomes. You figure out how to do it, right? I'm leveraging your creativity, what you bring to this company, this project, this game. That's what I want you here for. So that's what I want from you. And you're going to collaborate. You're going to behind the scenes, you're going to speak to the right people. You're going to look outside the organization, do whatever you need to do. And do you know what? I'm going to make this a safe space for us to learn and to contribute and to do all this good stuff. And I'm talking probably more here in the context of innovation, but it applies, as you say, to anything we wish to do with our teams when we work remotely or in a hybrid way.
And I think as well, just thinking back to what you say about play, Philip, and as a kid, we did all of this and we did it naturally. We tried things, turned bookshelves upside down and did whatever. And, what we all did, we made things out of things. They fell apart. We tried again. We built, we rebuilt, we consulted with friends and neighbors and uncles and aunts. And maybe some of us produced something and maybe some of us didn't. But we learned those skills. And yet when we're at work, there's so much pressure on us to know. the answer.
Yes, exactly. That's right. And well, I think you're absolutely right, Susan. It's the leader who sets the tone. And if you can say that and admit that you don't have all the answers, then I think that's an invitation for others to step up and to start leveraging what they bring to your company, to your project.
Yeah, and it is possible. That's the thing. And you know, and what you say, like what Doug Hall has done and how you set it out, it's what any business should be doing anyway. You know, to have that stimulus for ideas, diversity of thinking, and minimizing fear. I mean, like,
yeah, and you know, so I shouldn't minimize, I guess, that the fact that there are 48 skills behind what I've kind of very hastily kind of outlined as this thing called innovation engineering that Doug Hall documented and codified and has evolved over time. So there is structure, but it's freedom in a framework, as we like to say, because it's not about a piece of software. It's not about not doing having a kind of gated system or not having a particular front end to capture all your ideas. It's not about throwing stuff out. It's actually just about saying, do you know what? There is something that you can overlay on the way you work that has been thought through, that has been tested and tried and works and is not complicated and can be learned. and everyone in your organization, or certainly those that you need to be able to do this, can finally learn how to innovate consistently well for reliable results that are meaningfully unique. And that's what excites me and what gets me out of bed every day.
Yeah, and I can hear it in your voice. And absolutely, I mean, the simplicity, I think, are not complex. For me, that doesn't mean it's easy.
Yeah.
Just because it's simple, it doesn't mean it's easy.
Well put.
But to be able to conceptualize it means then you can approach it. And that's why ideas need to be simple. But what goes on in the background is never easy.
Exactly. Yeah, we love to talk about a concept as you shape your idea into a concept. It should be impossible to misunderstand. And to make that really clear, what we say is 12-year-olds should be able to understand what you say, you know. And I think we obscure so much with, we just use language that kind of makes things bigger or more exciting than what they really are. However, clarity counts for a lot. Certainly if you want an investor to back your business, right?
That's so funny. I know you like to write poetry, but what came up for me there, I'm going to just add this in, as we were talking about simplicity and overcomplicating things and the language we use and everything. I can remember when I was about 14 or 15 in school, and the English teacher, it was a parent teacher meeting, and the English teacher told my parents that Yeats, famous Irish poet, would turn in his grave in the way that I described his poetry, because I made it too simple and too common. And at the time, that like stopped me from writing and doing stuff absolutely. For years, you know, terrible, really like thinking, I don't know how to express myself. But actually, I learned that I was able to take complicated things and make them simple.
And what an incredibly powerful skill that is. Yeah.
But it was discouraged.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting as well. And we get a lot of this stuff as well that we bring into workplaces with us, that we've had from our upbringing, that also shadow as well as promote.
Yeah, no, you're so right. Yeah,
our backstories do matter. So, Philip, we're nearly done, and we won't go to the poetry or the writing, but I really want to hear about underwater hockey, because I have never heard about that before.
A high school environment where we had a swimming pool that was outdoors and not covered up. Yeah, we had a teacher who was a guidance teacher as well as a sports teacher who took various things, and he loved this thing called underwater hockey, right? And so I loved swimming and diving, as I still do. I'm a big water baby, as is my wife, and I just tried this sport, and I kind of got into it in literally maybe in the last sort of year or so of my school career. It's a crazy thing. It's got to be probably the most boring thing to watch from a spectator sport. It doesn't really work unless you're underwater with a scuba tank, or there's a sort of a window onto the swimming pool. But it's such fun. You're sort of 6 aside, and you have you have a hockey stick that's effectively a piece of marine ply, about 1.5 foot long with a curve to it. And you're literally driving with a pair of thin goggles and a snorkel, and that's it. Underwater, probably 3-4 meters down. You're driving this weighted puck along the bottom of a swimming pool to eventually try and fling it into a goal on the other side. And the thing is, right, there's a lot of strategy involved, but of course, breath holding is a key skill there, and timing it is key. So you've got to get your waves that you send your 2 or 3 people to follow in behind the crew that's driving the puck that's going to be coming up to the surface. So yes, it's a real thing. It is a thing. Loved it, and probably wish that I played a lot more of it. But
there's not much of that going on in Scotland, I'd say, is there?
Well, you say that. I think there is actually. There's a squad at Edinburgh University, if I'm not mistaken.
And Philip, just back to that book again, a lovely book called Purposeful People. Now, I haven't read all the chapters in it yet, but maybe you just say a few words about that as well, because I think some of our listeners might be interested in it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Susan. So Purposeful People was compiled by Chris Patton, an ex-Royal Marine, wonderful man with a great vision. And the subtitle of Purposeful People is Business Leaders Making a Difference. There are 20 of us in this book from different walks of life and different careers, to be honest, that all tell some of our backstory and talk about what's meaningful to us personally, often professionally too, and how these things, of course, connect.
Yeah, they're inextricably linked, aren't they? They really are. And I think that's the beauty. If you can combine your passion with your work, it just brings color to the adventure and innovation in your life.
Indeed.
Which has really come out in this conversation, Philip. So if somebody would like to connect with you, what is the best way of doing that, Philip? And if they'd like to hear more about innovation engineering and what Eureka Europe does?
Well, probably the simplest thing is it sounds like we're making a plug for LinkedIn, right? But LinkedIn is probably a good place to begin. Otherwise, my email would be philip with 1L at eureka1europe.com, or one word. And I'd be delighted to hear from anybody really who's really wanting to, even if they have an organization that is innovative, very innovative, wants to take it to the next level and actually make it a consistent, repeatable process that involves more people and makes more of their organization's talent, because that's really what we're about, is helping people build their own innovation muscle.
Brilliant. Well, I have thoroughly enjoyed that conversation, and it's gone all over the place. I had no idea I was going to end up on the coast of West Africa looking for diamonds this morning. So thank you, Philip, for that.
All before lunch, yes.
Yes.
Well, Susan, thank you very much for the opportunity and the privilege of joining your many other podcastees, if I can call them those, and look forward to hearing the final cut. But thanks again, Susan. Lovely speaking with you.
You're very welcome. Thank you, Philip. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening today. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone you know who would enjoy it too. I believe we are all entitled to enjoy our work, and the future of work life will be changed by those who put people first and create more fulfilling work lives for themselves, their colleagues, their teams and organisations. If you have any suggestions for topics you'd like to have covered, guests you'd like to hear from, or questions for me, please drop a line to Susan at beyond-thenumbers.com. And finally, please consider leaving a review.